Chapter 5. I kept the light away from my face, kept my voice low. "Not quite," I said. "Not quite." He sighed.
"You remain unconvinced."
He looked forward and cocked his head, peering down at me.
"Why must you spoil things?"
he said. "I've spoiled nothing." He lowered the lamp. I turned my head again, but he finally got a good look at my face. He laughed.
"Funny. Funny," he said. "You've come as the young Lord Corbin, thinking to sway me with family sentiment. Why did you not choose Brand or Blaze? It was Clarissa's lot served us best."
I shrugged and stood. "Yes and no," I said, determined now to feed him ambiguities for so long as he'd accept them and respond. Something of value might emerge, and it seemed an easy way to keep him in a good humor. "And yourself?" I continued. "What face would you put on things?"
"Why, to win your goodwill, I'll match you,"
he said, and then he began to laugh. He threw his head back, and as his laughter rang about me, a change came over him. His stature seemed to increase, and his face luffed like a sail cut too close to the wind. The hump on his back was diminished as he straightened and stood taller. His features rearranged themselves and his beard darkened. By then it was obvious that he was somehow redistributing his body mass, for the nightshirt which had reached his ankles was now midway up his shins. He breathed deeply and his shoulders widened. His arms lengthened. His bulging abdomen narrowed, tapered. He reached shoulder height on me and then higher. He looked me in the eye. His garment reached only to his knees. His hump was totally resorbed. His face gave a final twist. His features steadied, were reset. His laughter fell to a chuckle, faded, closed with a smirk. I regarded a slightly slimmer version of myself.
"Sufficient?"
he inquired. "Not half bad," I said. "Wait till I toss a couple logs on the fire."
"I'll help you."
"That's all right." I drew some wood from a rack to the right. Any stall served me somewhat, buying reactions from my study. As I was about the work, he crossed to a chair and seated himself. When I glanced at him, I saw that he was not looking at me, but staring into the shadows. I drew out the fire building, hoping that he would say something, anything. Eventually, he did.
"Whatever became of the grand design?"
he asked. I did not know whether he was speaking of the pattern or some master plan of Dad's to which he had been privy. So, "You tell me," I said. He chuckled again.
"Why not? You changed your mind. That is what happened," he said.
"From what to what, as you see it?"
"Don't mock me. Even you have no right to mock me," he said. "Least of all you."
I got to my feet. "I was not mocking you," I said. I crossed the room to another chair and carried it over to a position near the fire, across from Dworkin. I seated myself. "How did you recognize me?" I asked.
"My whereabouts are hardly common knowledge."
"That is true."
"Do many in Amber think me dead?"
"Yes, and others suppose you might be traveling off in shadow."
"I see."
"How have you been feeling?" He gave me an evil grin.
"Do you mean, am I still mad?"
"You put it more bluntly than I care to."
"There's a fading, there's an intensifying," he said. "It comes to me and it departs again. For the moment, I am almost myself. Almost, I say. The shock of your visit, perhaps. Something is broken in my mind. You know that. It cannot be otherwise, though. You know that, too."
"I suppose that I do," I said. "And why don't you tell me all about it, all over again? Just the business of talking might make you feel better, and might give me something I've missed. Tell me a story." Another laugh.
"Anything you like." Have you any preferences? My flight from chaos to this small, sudden island in the sea of night? My meditations upon the abyss? The revelation of the pattern in a jewel hung round the neck of a unicorn? My transcription of the design by lightning, blood, and lyre, while our fathers raged baffled? Too late to come call me back, while the poem of fire ran through that first route in my brain, infecting me with the will to form. Too late! Too late. Possessed of the abominations born of the disease, beyond their aid, their power, I planned and built, captive of my new self. Is that the tale you'd hear again? Or rather, I tell you of its cure.
My mind spun at the implications he had just scattered by the fistful. I could not tell whether he spoke literally or metaphorically, or was simply sharing paranoid delusions. But the things that I wanted to hear, had to hear, were things closer to the moment. So, regarding the shadowy image of myself from which that ancient voice emerged, "Tell me of its cure," I said. He braced his fingertips together and spoke through them. "I am the pattern," he said, "in a very real sense. And passing through my mind to achieve the form it now holds, the foundation of amber, it marked me as surely as I marked it. I realized one day that I am both the pattern and myself, and it was forced to become Dworkin in the process of becoming itself. There were mutual modifications in the birthing of this place and this time, and therein lay our weakness as well as our strength. For it occurred to me that damage to the pattern would be damage to myself, and damage to myself would be reflected within the pattern. Yet I could not be truly harmed because the pattern protects me. And who could I harm who but I could harm the pattern? A beautiful, closed system, it seemed. Its weakness totally shielded by its strength." He fell silent. I listened to the fire. I do not know what he listened to. Then, "I was wrong," he said. "Such a simple matter, too. My blood, with which I drew it, could deface it. But it took me ages to realize that the blood of my blood could also do this thing. You could use it. You could also change it. Yea, unto the third generation." It did not come to me as a surprise, learning that he was the grandsire to us all. Somehow it seemed that I had known all along, had known but never voiced it. Yet, if anything, this raised more questions than it answered. Collect one generation of ancestry. Proceed to confusion. I had less idea now than ever before as to what Dworkin really was. Add to this the fact which even he acknowledged. It was a tale told by a madman. "But to repair it?" I asked. He smirked, my own face twisting before me. "Have you lost your taste to be a lord of the living world? Of the living void? A king of chaos?" he asked. "Mayhap," I replied. "By the unicorn, thy mother! I knew it would come to this. The pattern is as strong in you as is a greater realm. What then is your desire?" "To preserve the realm." He shook his/my head. "'Twould be simpler to destroy everything and try a new start, as I have told you so often before." "I'm stubborn, so tell me again," I said, attempting to simulate Dad's gruffness. He shrugged. "Destroy the pattern and we destroy Amber, and all of the shadows in polar array about it. Give me leave to destroy myself in the midst of the pattern and we will obliterate it. Give me leave by giving me your word that you will then take the jewel which contains the essence of order and use it to create a new pattern, bright and pure, untainted, drawing upon the stuff of your own being while the legions of chaos attempt to distract you on every side. Promise me that and let me end it. For broken as I am, I would rather die for order than live for it. What say you now?" "Would it not be better to try mending the one we've got than to undo the work of eons?"
"Coward!" he cried, leaping to his feet. "I knew you would say that again."
"Well, wouldn't it?" He began to pace.
How many times have we been through this? He asked. Nothing has changed. You're afraid to try it.
Perhaps, I said. But do you not feel that something for which you have given so much is worth some effort, some additional sacrifice, if there's even a possibility of saving it?
You still do not understand, he said. I cannot but think that a damaged thing should be destroyed, and hopefully replaced. The nature of my personal injury is such that I cannot envision repair. I am damaged in just this fashion. My feelings are foreordained.
If the jewel can create a new pattern, why will it not serve to repair the old one, end our troubles, heal your spirit? He approached and stood before me.
Where is your memory? He said. You know that it would be infinitely more difficult to repair the damage than it would be to start over again. Even the jewel could be more easily destroy it than repair it. Have you forgotten what it is like out there?
He gestured toward the wall behind him.
Do you want to go and look at it again?
Yes, I said. I would like that. Let's go. I rose and looked down at him. His control over his form had begun slipping when he had grown angry. He had already lost 3 or 4 inches in height, the image of my face melting back into his gnome-like features, and a noticeable bulge was growing between his shoulders, had already been visible when he had gestured. His eyes widened and he studied my face.
You really mean it, he said after a moment. All right, then, let us go.
He turned and moved toward the big metal door, and I followed him. He used both hands to turn the key. Then he threw his weight against it. I moved to help him, but he brushed me aside with extraordinary strength before giving the door a final shove. It made a grating noise and moved outward into a fully opened position. I was immediately struck by a strange, somehow familiar odor. Dworkin stepped through and paused. He located what looked to be a long staff leaning against the wall off to his right. He struck it several times against the ground, and its upper end began to glow. It lit up the area fairly well, revealing a narrow tunnel into which he now advanced. I followed him, and it widened before too long, so that I was able to come abreast of him. The odor grew stronger, and I could almost place it. It had been something fairly recent. It was close to 80 paces before our way took a turn to the left and upward. We passed then through a little appendix-like area. It was strewn with broken bones, and a large metal ring was set into the rock a couple of feet above the floor. Affixed there, too, was a glittering chain, which fell to the floor and trailed on ahead like a line of molten droplets cooling in the gloom. Our way narrowed again after that, and Dworkin took the lead once more. After a brief time, he turned an abrupt corner, and I heard him muttering. I nearly ran into him when I made the turn myself. He was crouched down and groping with his left hand inside a shadowy cleft. When I heard the soft cawing noise and saw that chain vanished into the opening, I realized what it was and where we were.
Good, Wixer, I heard him say. I'm not going far. It's all right. Good, Wixer. Here is something to chew on.
From where he had fetched whatever he tossed the beast, I do not know. But the purple griffin, which I had now advanced far enough to glimpse as it stirred within its lair, accepted the offering with a toss of its head and a series of crunching noises. Dworkin grinned up at me.
Surprised? He asked.
At what?
You thought I was afraid of him. You thought I would never make friends with him. You set him out there to keep me in there, away from the pattern.
Did I ever say that?
You did not have to. I'm not a fool.
Have it your way, I said. He chuckled, rose, and continued along the passageway. I followed, and it grew level underfoot once again. The ceiling rose, and the way widened. At length, At length, we came to a cave mouth. Dworkin stood for a moment silhouetted, staff raised before him. It was night outside, and a clean salt smell swept the musk from my nostrils. Another moment, and he moved forward once more. passing into a world of sky candles and blue velars. Continuing after him, I had gasped briefly at the amazing view. It was not simply that the stars in the moonless, cloudless sky blazed with a preternatural brilliance, nor that the distinction between sky and sea had once again been totally obliterated. It was that the pattern glowed in an almost acetylene blue against that sea sky. And all the stars above, beside, and below were arrayed with geometric precision, forming a fantastic oblique latticework which, more than anything else, gave the impression that we hung in the midst of a cosmic web, where the pattern was the true center. The rest of the radiant meshwork a precise consequence of its existence, configuration, position. Dworkin continued on down to the pattern, right up to the edge beside the darkened area. He waved his staff over it, and turned to look at me just as I came near.
"There you are," he announced. "The hole in my mind. I can no longer think through it, only around it. I no longer know what must be done to repair something I now lack. If you think that you can do it, you must be willing to lay yourself open to instant destruction each time you depart the pattern to cross the break. Not destruction by the dark portion, destruction by the pattern itself when you break the circuit. The jewel may or may not sustain you, I do not know, but it will not grow easier. It will become more difficult with each circuit, and your strength will be lessening all the while. The last time we discussed it, you were afraid. Do you mean to say you have grown bolder since then?"
"Perhaps," I said. "You see no other way?"
"I know it can be done starting with a clean slate, because once I did it so. Beyond that, I see no other way. The longer you wait, the more the situation worsens. Why not fetch the jewel and lend me your blade, son? I see no better way."
"No," I said. "I must know more. Tell me again how the damage was done."
"I still do not know which of your children shed our blood upon this spot. If this is what you mean, it was done. Let it go at that. Our darker natures come forth strongly in them. It must be that they are too close to the chaos from which we sprang, going without the exercises of will we endured in defeating it. I had thought that the ritual of traveling the pattern might suffice for them. I could think of nothing stronger, yet it failed. They strike out against everything. They seek to destroy the pattern itself."
"If we succeed in making a fresh start, might not these events simply repeat themselves?"
"I do not know. But what choice have we other than failure and a return to chaos?"
"What will become of them if we try for a new beginning?" He was silent for a long while, and then he shrugged.
"I cannot tell."
"What would another generation have been like?" He chuckled.
"How can such a question be answered? I have no idea."
I withdrew the mutilated trump and passed it to him. He regarded it near the blaze of his staff. "I believe it is Random's son Martin," I said. "He whose blood was spilled here. I have no idea whether he still lives." "What do you think he might have amounted to?" He looked back out over the pattern.
"So this is the object which decorated it," he said. "How did you fetch it forth?"
"It was gotten," I said. "It is not your work, is it?"
"Of course not. I've never set eyes on the boy. But this answers your question, does it not? If there's another generation, your children would destroy it."
"And as we would destroy them?" He met my eyes and peered.
"Is it that you are suddenly becoming a doting father?"
he asked. "If you did not prepare that trump, who did?" He glanced down and flicked it with his fingernail.
"My best pupil, your son Brand. That is his style. See what they do as soon as they gain a little power? Would any of them offer their lives to preserve the realm, to restore the pattern?
Probably, I said. Probably Benedict, Gerard, Random, Corwin.
Benedict has the mark of doom upon him. Gerard possesses the will, but not the wit. Random lacks courage and determination. Corwin, is he not out of favor and out of sight?
My thoughts returned to our last meeting, when he had helped me to escape from my cell into Cabra. It occurred to me that he might have had second thoughts concerning that, not having been aware of the circumstances which had put me there.
Is that why you have taken this form? He went on. Is this some manner of rebuke? Are you testing me again?
He is neither out of favor nor sight, I said, though he has enemies among the family and elsewhere. He would attempt anything to preserve the realm. How do you see his chances?
Has he not been away for a long while?
Yes.
Then he might have changed. I do not know.
I believe he has changed. I know that he is willing to try. He stared at me again, and he kept staring.
You are not Oberon, he said at length.
No.
You are he whom I see before me.
No more, no less.
I see. I did not realize that you knew of this place.
I didn't until recently. The first time that I came here, I was led by the unicorn. His eyes widened.
That is very interesting, he said. It has been so long.
What of my question?
Question? What question?
My chances. Do you think I might be able to repair the pattern? He advanced slowly, and reaching up, placed his right hand onto my shoulder. The staff tilted in his other hand as he did so. Its blue light flared within the foot of my face, but I felt no heat. He looked into my eyes.
You have changed,
he said after a time. Enough, I asked, to do the job? He looked away.
Perhaps enough to make it worth trying, he said. Even if we are foredoomed to failure.
Will you help me?
I do not know, he said, that I will be able. This thing with my moods, my thoughts, it comes and goes. Even now I feel some of my control slipping away. The excitement, perhaps. We had best get back inside.
I heard a clinking noise at my back. When I turned, the griffin was there, his head swinging slowly from left to right, his tail from right to left, his tongue darting. He began to circle us, halting when he came into a position between Dworkin and the pattern.
He knows, Dworkin said. He can sense it when I begin to change. He will not let me near the pattern then. Good wick, sir. We are returning now. It is all right. Come, Corwin.
We headed back toward the cave mouth, and Wixer followed, a clink for every pace. The jewel, I said, the jewel of judgment. You say that it is necessary for the repair of the pattern?
Yes, he said. It would have to be borne the entire distance through the pattern, reinscribing the original design in the places where it has been broken. This could only be done by one who is attuned to the jewel, though.
I am attuned to the jewel, I said.
How?
He asked, halting. Wixer made a cackling noise behind us, and we resumed walking. Excuse me? I followed your written instructions, and Eric's verbal ones, I said. I took it with me to the center of the pattern and projected myself through it.
I see, he said. How did you obtain it?
From Eric on his deathbed. We entered the cave.
You have it now?
I was forced to cache it in a place off in shadow.
I would suggest you retrieve it quickly and bring it here, or take it back to the palace. It is best kept near the center of things.
Why is that?
It tends to have a distorting effect on shadows if it lies too long among them.
Distorting? In what fashion?
There's no way to tell in advance. It depends entirely upon the locale.
We rounded a corner, continued on back through the gloom. What does it mean, I said, when you are wearing the jewel and everything begins to slow down about you? Fiona warned me that this was dangerous, but she was not certain why.
It means you have reached the bounds of your own existence, that your energies will be shortly exhausted, that you will die unless you do something quickly.
What is that?
Begin to draw power from the pattern itself, the primal pattern within the jewel.
How is this achieved?
You must surrender to it. Release yourself. Blot out your identity. Erase the bounds which separate you from everything else.
It sounds easier said than done.
But it can be done, and it is the only way.
I shook my head. We moved on, coming at last to the big door. Dworkin extinguished the staff and leaned it against the wall. We entered, and he secured the door. Wixer had stationed himself just outside.
You will have to leave now,
Dworkin said. But there are many more things that I must ask you, and some that I would like to tell you.
My thoughts grow meaningless, and your words would be wasted. Tomorrow night, or the next. Hurry, go!
Why the rush?
I may harm you when the change comes over me. I'm holding it back by main will now. Depart!
I do not know how. I know how to get here, but...
There are all manner of special trumps in the desk in the next room. Take the light. Go anywhere. Get out of here.
I was about to protest that I hardly feared any physical resistance he could muster when his features began to flow like melting wax, and he somehow seemed much larger and longer-limbed than he had been. Seizing the light, I fled the room, a sudden chill upon me, to the desk. I tore open the drawer and snatched at some trumps which lay scattered within it. I heard footsteps, then, of something entering the room behind me. Coming from the chamber I had just departed, they did not seem like the footsteps of a man. I did not look back. Instead, I raised the cards before me and regarded the one on top. It was an unfamiliar scene, but I opened my mind immediately and reached for it. A mountain crag, something indistinct beyond it, a strangely stippled sky, a scattering of stars to the left. The card was alternately hot and cold to my touch, and a heavy wind seemed to come blowing through it as I stared, somehow rearranging the prospect. From right behind me, then, the heavily altered but still recognizable voice of Dworkin spoke.
Fool, you have chosen the land of your doom!
I don't know what I was doing with that one. A great claw-like hand, black, leathery, gnarled, reached over my shoulder as if to snatch the card away. But the vision seemed ready, and I rushed forward into it, turning the card from me as soon as I realized I had made my escape. Then I halted and stood stock still to let my senses adjust to the new locale. I knew, from snatches of legend, bits of family gossip, and from a general feeling which came over me, I knew the place to which I had come. It was with full certainty as to identity that I raised my eyes to look upon the courts of chaos. Whew. Chapter 6. Where? The senses are such uncertain things, and now mine were strained beyond their limits. The rock on which I stood, if I attempted to fix my gaze upon it, it took on the aspect of a pavement on a hot afternoon. It seemed to shift and waver, though my footing was undisturbed, and it was undecided as to the portion of the spectrum it might call home. It pulsated and flashed like the skin of an iguana. Looking upward, I beheld a sky such as I had never set eyes upon. At the moment, it was split down the middle, half of it deepest night black, and the stars danced within it. When I say danced, I do not mean they twinkled. They cavorted and they shifted magnitudes. They darted and they circled. They flared to nova brilliance and then faded to nothing. It was a frightening spectacle to behold, and my stomach tightened within me as I experienced a profound acrophobia. Yet, shifting my gaze did little to improve the situation. The other half of the sky was like a bottle of colored sands, continuously shaken, Belts of orange, yellow, red, blue, brown, and purple turned and twisted. Patches of green, mauve, gray, and dead white came and went, sometimes snaking into belthood, replacing or joining the other writhing entities. And these too shimmered and wavered, creating impossible sensations of distance and nearness. At times, some or all seemed literally sky high, and then again they came to fill the air before me, gauzy, transparent mists, translucent swaths, or solid tentacles of color. It was not until later that I recognized that the line which separated the black from the color was advancing slowly from my right while retreating to my left. It was as if the entire celestial mandala were rotating about a point directly overhead. As to the light source on the brighter half, it simply could not be determined. Standing there, I looked down upon what at first seemed a valley filled with countless explosions of color, but when the advancing darkness faced this display away, the stars danced and burned within its depths as well as above. Giving them the impression of a bottomless chasm. Sorry, I lost my spot for a second. It was as if I stood at the end of the world, the end of the universe, the end of everything. But, far, far out from where I stood, something hovered on a mount of sheerest black, a blackness itself, but edged and tempered with barely perceptible flashes of light. I could not guess at its size, for distance, depth, perspective were absent here. A single edifice, a group, a city, or simply a place. The outline varied each time that it fell upon my retina. Now, faint and misty sheets drifted slowly between us, twisting, as if long strands of gauze were buoyed by heated air. The mandala ceased its turning when it had exactly reversed itself. The colors were behind me now, and imperceptible unless I turned my head, an action I had no desire to take. It was pleasant standing there, staring at the formlessness from which all things eventually emerged. Before the pattern, even, this thing was. I knew this, dimly but surely, at the very center of my consciousness. I knew this because I was certain that I had been here before. Child of the man I had become, it seemed that I had been brought here in some distant day, whether by Dad or Dworkin I could not now recall, and had been stood or held in this place, or one very near to it, looking out upon the same scene, with, I am certain, a similar lack of comprehension, a similar sense of apprehension. My pleasure was tinged with a nervous excitement, a sense of the forbidden, a feeling of dubious anticipation. Peculiarly, at that moment, there rose in me a longing for the jewel I had to abandon in my compost heap on the shadow earth, the thing Dworkin had made so much of. Could it be that some part of me sought a defense or at least a symbol of resistance against whatever was out there? Probably. As I continued to stare, fascinated, across the chasm, it was as if my eyes adjusted or the prospect shifted once again, subtly, for now I discerned tiny ghostly forms moving within that place, like slow-motion meteors along the gauzy strands. I waited, regarding them carefully, courting some small understanding of the actions in which they were engaged. At length, one of the strands drifted very near. Shortly thereafter, I had my answer. There was a movement. One of the rushing forms grew larger, and I realized that it was following the twisting way that led toward me. In only a few moments it took on the proportions of a horseman. As it came on, it assumed a semblance of solidity without losing that ghostly quality which seemed to cling to everything which lay before me. A moment later, I beheld a naked rider on a hairless horse, both deathly pale, rushing in my direction. The rider brandished a bone-white blade. His eyes and the eyes of the horse both flashed red. I do not really know whether he saw me, whether we existed on the same plane of reality. So unnatural was his mien. Yet I unsheathed Grey Swandeer and took a step backward as he approached. His long white hair shed tiny sparkling motes, and when he turned his head I knew that he was coming for me, for then I felt his gaze like a cold pressure across the front of my body. I turned sidewise and raised my blade to guard. He continued, and I realized that both he and the horse were big, bigger even than I had thought. They came on. When they reached the point nearest me, some 10 meters perhaps, the horse reared as the rider drew it to a halt. They regarded me then, bobbing and swaying as if on a raft in a gently swelling sea.
Your name, the rider demanded. Give me your name, who comes to this place.
His voice produced a crackling sensation in my ears. It was all one sound level, loud and without inflection. Oops. I shook my head. I give my name when I choose, not when I am ordered to, I said. Who are you? He gave 3 short barks, which I took to be a laugh.
I will hail you down and about, where you will cry it out forever.
I pointed Grey Swandeer at his eyes. Talk is cheap, I said. Whiskey costs money. I felt a faint, cool sensation just then, as if someone were toying with my trump, thinking of me. But it was dim, weak, and I had no attention to spare, for the rider had passed some signal to his mount and the beast reared. The distance is too great, I decided, but this thought belonged to another shadow. The beast plunged ahead toward me, departing the tenuous roadway that had been its course. Its leap bore it to a point far short of my position. But it did not fall from there and vanish as I had hoped. It resumed the motions of galloping, and although its progress was not fully commensurate with the action, it continued to advance across the abyss at about half speed. While this was occurring, I saw that in the distance from which I had come, another figure appeared to be headed my way. Nothing to do but stand my ground, fight, and hope that I could dispatch this attacker before the other one was upon me. As the rider advanced, his ruddy gaze flickered over my person and halted when it fell upon Grey Swandeer. Whatever the nature of the mad illumination at my back, it had tricked the delicate tracery on my blade to life once more, so that portion of the pattern it bore swam and sparkled along its length. The horseman was very near by then, but he drew back on the reins, and his eyes leaped upward, meeting my own. His nasty grin vanished.
I know you, he said. You're the one called Corwin.
But we had him, me and my ally Momentum. His mount's front hooves fell upon the ledge, and I rushed forward. The beast's reflexes caused it to seek equal footing for its hind legs, despite the drawn reins. The rider swung his blade into a guard position as I came on, but I cross-stepped and attacked from his left. As he moved his blade crossbody, I was already lunging. Grey Swandeer sheared through his pale hide, entering beneath the sternum and above the guts. I wrenched my blade free, and gouts of fire poured like blood from his wound. His sword arm sagged, and his mount uttered a shriek that was almost a whistle as the blazing stream fell upon its neck. I danced back as the rider slumped forward, and the beast, now fully footed, plunged on toward me, kicking. I cut again, reflexively, defensively. My blade nicked its front foreleg, and it too began to burn. I sidestepped once again as it turned and made for me a second time. At that moment, the rider erupted into a pillar of light. The beast bellowed, wheeled, and rushed away. Without pausing, it plunged over the edge and vanished into the abyss, leaving me with the memory of the smoldering head of a cat which had addressed me long ago, and the chill which always accompanied the recollection. I was backed against rock, panting. The wispy road had drifted nearer, 10 feet perhaps from the ledge. I developed a cramp in my left side. The second rider was rapidly approaching. He was not pale like the first. His hair was dark, and there was color in his face. His mount was a properly maned sorrel. He bore a cocked and bolted crossbow. I glanced behind me, and there was no retreat, no crevice into which I might back. I wiped my palm on my trousers and gripped Grey Swandeer by the forte of the blade. I turned sideways so as to present the narrowest target possible. I raised my blade between us, hilt level with my head, point toward the ground, the only shield I possessed. The rider came abreast of me and halted at the nearest point on the gauzy strip. He raised the crossbow slowly, knowing that if he did not drop me instantly with his single shot, I might be able to hurl my blade like a spear. Our eyes met. He was beardless, slim, possibly light-eyed within the squint of his aim. He managed his mount well with just the pressure of his legs. His hands were big, steady, capable. A peculiar feeling passed over me as I beheld him. The moment stretched beyond the point of action. He rocked backward and lowered the weapon slightly, though none of the tension left his stance. "You," he called out. "Is that the blade, Grey Swan dear?" "Yes," I answered. "It is." He continued his appraisal, and something within me looked for words to wear, failed, and ran naked away through the night. "What do you want here?" he asked. "To depart," I said. There was a sh-cha as his bolt struck the rock far ahead and to the left of me. "Go then," he said. "This is a dangerous place for you." He turned his mount back in the direction from whence he had come. I lowered Grey Swan deer. "I won't forget you," I said. "No," he answered. "Do not." Then he galloped away, and moments later the gauze drifted off also. I resheathed Grey Swan deer and took a step forward. The world was beginning to turn about me again, the light advancing on my right, the dark retreating on my left. I looked about for some way to scale the rocky prominence at my back. It seemed to rise only 30 or 40 feet higher, and I wanted the view that might be available from its summit. My ledge extended onto my... Excuse me. My ledge extended to both my right and my left. On inspection, the way to the right narrowed quickly, however, without affording a suitable ascent. I turned and made my way to the left. I came upon a rougher spot in a narrow place beyond a rocky shoulder. Running my gaze up its height, an ascent seemed possible. I checked behind me after the approach of additional threats. The ghostly roadway had drifted further away. No new riders advanced. I commenced climbing. The going was not difficult, though the height proved greater than it had seemed from below. Likely a symptom of the spatial distortion which had seemed to have affected my sight of so much else in this place. After a time, I hauled myself up and stood erect at a point which afforded a better view in the direction opposite the abyss. Once again I beheld the chaotic colors. From my right, the darkness herded them. The land they danced above was rock-cropped and cratered. No sign of any life within it. Passing through its midst, however, from the far horizon to a point in the mountains somewhere to the right, inky and serpentine, ran what could only be the Black Road. Another 10 minutes of climbing and maneuvering, and I had positioned myself to view its terminus. It swept through a broad pass in the mountains and ran right to the very edge of the abyss. There its blackness merged with that which filled the place, noticeable now only by virtue of the fact that no stars shone through it. Using this occlusion to gauge it, I obtained the impression that it continued on to that dark eminence about which the misty strips drifted. I stretched out on my belly so as to disturb the outline of the low crest as little as possible to whatever unseen eyes might flick across it. Lying there, I thought upon the opening of this way. The damage to the pattern had laid amber open to this access, and I believed that my curse had provided the precipitating element. I felt now that it would have come to pass without me, but I was certain that I had done my part. The guilt was still partly mine, though no longer entirely so, as I had once believed. I thought then of Eric as he lay dying on Colvere. He had said that as much as he hated me, he was saving his dying curse for the enemies of Amber. In other words, this and these. Ironic. My efforts were now entirely directed toward making good on my least liked brother's dying wish. His curse to cancel my curse. Me as the agent. Fitting, though, perhaps, in some larger sense. I sought and was pleased not to discover ranks of glowing riders. Setting forth or assembling upon that road. Unless another raiding party was already underway, Amber was still temporarily safe. And was pleased not to discover. Okay. For a second, I thought he was saying that there were some gathering. Okay, cool. Where am I? I lost my spot. God damn it. A number of things immediately troubled me, however. Mainly, if time did indeed behave as peculiarly, why the fuck can I pronounce that word today? In that place, as Dara's possible origin indicated, then why had there not been another attack? They had certainly had ample time in which to recover and prepare for another assault. Had something occurred recently, by Amber's time, that is, to alter the nature of their strategy? If so, what? My weapons, Brand's recovery, or something else? I wondered, too, how far Benedict's outposts reached. Certainly not this far, I should have been informed. Had he ever been to this place? Had any of the others within recent memory stood where I had just stood, looking upon the courts of chaos, knowing something that I did not know? I resolved to question Brand and Benedict in this regard as soon as I returned. All of which led me to wonder how time was behaving with me at that moment. Better not to spend any more time here than I had to, I decided. I scanned the other trumps I had removed from Dworkin's desk. While they were all of them interesting, I was familiar with none of the scenes depicted. I slipped my own case then and riffled through to Random's trump. Perhaps he was the one who had tried to contact me earlier. I raised his card and regarded it. Shortly, it swam before my eyes, and I looked upon a blurred kaleidoscope of images, the impression of Random in their midst. Motion and twisting perspectives. "Random," I said, "this is Corwin." I felt his mind, but there was no response from it. It struck me then that he was in the middle of a hell ride, all of his concentration bent on wrapping the stuff of shadow about him. He could not respond without losing control. I blocked the trump with my hand, breaking the contact. I cut to Gerard's card. Moments later, there was a contact. I stood. "Corwin, where are you?" he inquired. "At the end of the world," I said, "and I want to come home." "Come ahead." He extended his hand. I reached out and clasped it, stepping forward. We were on the ground floor of the Palace in Amber, in the sitting room to which we had all adjourned on the night of Brand's return. It seemed to be early morning. There was a fire going on the grate. No one else was present. "I tried to reach you earlier," he said. "I think Brand did too, but I can't be sure." "How long have I been away?" 8 days, he said. "Glad I hurried. What's happening?" "Nothing untoward. I do not know what Brand wants. He kept asking for you, and I could not reach you. Finally, I gave him a deck and told him to see whether he could do any better. Apparently, he could not." "I was distracted," I said, "and the time flow differential was bad." He nodded. "I've been avoiding him now that he is out of danger. He's in one of his black moods again, and he insists that he can take care of himself. He is right in that, and it is just as well." "Where is he now?" "Back in his own quarters. He is still there as of perhaps an hour ago, brooding." "Has he been out at all?" "A few brief walks, but not for the past several days." "I guess I'd best go see him then. Any word on Random?" "Yes," he said. "Benedict returned several days ago. He said they had found a number of leads concerning Random's son. He helped him check out a couple of them. One led further, but Benedict felt he had best not be away from Amber for too long, things being as uncertain as they are. So he left Random to continue the search on his own. He gained something in the venture, though. He came back sporting an artificial arm. A beautiful piece of work. He can do anything with that he could before. Really, I said. It sounds strangely familiar. He smiled and nodded. He told me that you brought it back for him from Oath. In fact, he wants to speak with you about it as soon as possible. I'll bet, I said. Where is he now? At one of the outposts he has established along the Black Road. You would have to reach him by Trump. Thanks, I said. Anything further on Julian or Fiona? He shook his head. All right, I said, turning toward the door. I guess I'll go see Brand first. I'm curious to know what he wants. He said. I'll remember that, I told him. I left the room and headed for the stairs. Boy howdy. There we go. Double chapter. As you deserve. We'll continue with chapter 7 next time. I don't know what the fuck I was doing with Dworkin's voice, but I hope it ended up okay at least. Anyhow, aside from that, we did get our first hint of how the Logris works. Whenever Dworkin fetches the little treat for Wixer, which I find interesting. It makes you understand that Roger Zelazny had at least been planning some things in advance for a while. Makes you wonder how long, almost. But the fact that he had already sort of gone through with the Logris powers, the basic principle of the Logris, at least, not necessarily the magic, but the magic system doesn't get explored until back in the next series. The stuff in the Corwin cycle is very folky and soft magic, rather than anything substantial, which is good. It suits it well. Anyhow, I'll cease my ramblings and leave it off here. I'm sorry for so many yawns this episode, too. I'm just freaking exhausted today. If I hadn't promised that I would record an episode, I don't think you guys would have got one, because I'm ready for bed. I'm going to head to bed like right after this. So y'all have a great day, night, or whatever the time it is for you when you see this. And I'll be sleeping. So good night, or good morning, or whatever. See ya.